Eliminating or even undermining Christianity opens the path for government control over every aspect of life, from what we are allowed to read or watch, to what we are allowed to believe, to what we are forced to do. Pulling the thread of Christianity out of the foundational fabric will destroy the country as we know it. And someone, some entity, will have to build it back better. And it will be, must be, totalitarian. It did not have to be this way. The American church abdicated their responsibility to society. It's not like it happened overnight. There's a lot that the American church could be taken to task for over the years, decades even. First of all, it's not united in spirit. I know this because if it were, that spirit would be moving mightily in this country, and the opposite has happened. Second of all, some parts of the so-called American church are eagerly eating up the poisonous tares and calling the actual wheat the poisonous stuff. And then there's the marrying of corporate structure and the American style success with the supposed body of Christ, which tends to lead to corruption. And the last thing I would mention is that the American church abdicated its direct responsibility to the widow, the orphan, the hungry, the prisoner, and the oppressed, but also to the other members of their body. They also stopped walking justly and loving mercy. They are low on faith, but high on self-righteousness. The American church as a whole does not even know how to love their neighbor anymore. And the lesson of private space and private thought outside the influence of the world has been completely lost on this, quote, Christian generation. But yes, the American church abdicated their responsibility to society long ago. And the last nail in the coffin of the American way of life was the COVID-19 pandemic. Chapter 11, the pandemic. We saw some crazy things in 2020. The Coast Guard running down a lone paddleboarder out in the middle of the Pacific Ocean. Police not allowing a married couple to sit together on the same park bench. Drones hovering in public places, reminding people to socially distance. Beaches closed, parks closed, libraries closed, schools closed, salons closed, stores closed. Playgrounds were roped off with swings locked. Skate parks were filled in with sand. Travel bans were put in place, not just to and from other countries, but to and from other states in the same country, our country. What happened to the land of the free and the home of the brave? I mentioned some of these things because I think they were too soon forgotten. I don't even mention the half of it, and I know that now that you're remembering, you know that too. There's so much more I could have listed there. Lockdowns. In March of 2020, we decided to lock down for 15 days to flatten the curve, or slow the spread, depending on who you ask. At the time, it seemed like this might be a good idea. It would give scientists time to research the novel, quote, new coronavirus and come up with effective testing and treatments. The 15 days would also provide hospitals time to ensure they were properly resourced and not overwhelmed by patients. Because from the get-go, they made it sound like everyone was going to get COVID-19 and there was no way to stop it. And so they were essentially telling us we also needed to be prepared for millions of deaths in just a few short months. So school was suspended, college went online, sporting events were canceled, spring breaks trips were canceled, grocery stores ran out of toilet paper, weddings and funerals were rescheduled, but it was only 2 weeks, right? To most people, the benefits of finding effective treatments and not overwhelming hospitals before they were properly resourced was worth shutting down their lives for 15 days. Many businesses also thought it was worth a half-month loss. There really wasn't any contest when it came to the cost-benefit analysis of locking down those first 15 days. Unfortunately, it wasn't 15 days. In Florida, it was 9 weeks. In other places, there were stay-at-home orders for over a year, especially for the unvaccinated after the emergency use authorization was issued for Pfizer, Moderna, and the J&J SARS-CoV-2 vaccines. And the time was not used wisely either. Why were they not studying those who appeared not to be able to contract the disease? And where were these effective treatments that they were supposed to be developing? And why couldn't we figure out how to reopen Sweet Tomatoes? I mean, other restaurants. Or let people visit their loved ones in nursing homes and the hospital? Where was all the information we needed to make informed choices about how to live our lives? Consequences of these long lockdowns were severe. Hospitals in areas fairly unaffected by the virus had to fire staff, and elective surgeries were canceled. Not to mention, people did not go to the hospital for things that may have actually ended up killing them, like heart attacks. Doctor visits became televisits, and I remember a story of a woman who did not get in-person prenatal care and thus an easily treatable condition went undiagnosed and ended up killing her and her unborn child. Students lost the last quarter of their school year, at least, not to mention benchmark events like senior prom, senior class trips, graduation, along with college scholarship opportunities, both academic and athletic. And those in high school not graduating were not on track the coming fall. And elementary school students were even worse off. According to some working in education, there were absentee rates as high as 77% for, quote, at-home learning. They just never came back. When parks and beaches closed, this forced more people inside with nowhere left to escape, which led to an increase in domestic violence calls, but also to a decrease in child abuse reports, because teachers are the primary reporters and teachers were no longer seeing and interacting with their students and thus could not assess change in behavior or new injuries. But it would be very naive to believe that as domestic violence went up, child abuse incidents went down. Mental health issues and reports of anxiety and depression skyrocketed. The suicide rate for young people increased drastically. Food supply chains were disrupted, and the risk of starvation and famine around the world skyrocketed in conjunction with the locust disaster in India and other natural disasters. Medium-sized businesses were put out of business, but before that, the government was telling them who and what was essential, dictating what these stores could and could not sell, who could and could not remain open, and defining what an essential worker was. Hair salons, nail salons, and personal services took their businesses into their homes, and many were fined or arrested for trying to make a living, often by undercover police officers making appointments for their services. At the same time, big box stores thrived and were not limited in what they could sell as essential. We saw innovations in delivery systems as well as appointment setting and keeping. Office jobs moved into homes, redefining professional work expectations for both employees and employers alike. Many business rental agreements went unrenewed as technology supplanted conference rooms and cubicles. Other employees were furloughed or simply lost their jobs outright. And mortgage companies allowed late or skipped payments. And many renters stopped paying rent, putting landlords in a bind regarding their own costs, not just of maintaining those properties, but paying their own personal bills. Churches closed too, leading to online streaming, uploaded recordings, or even short-range radio broadcasts people could listen to in their cars. But when churches closed, giving went down, and attendance, even with an online option, also decreased significantly. Governments shut down too. This also meant libraries were closed and criminals were released for some reason. Online streaming and online gaming subscriptions increased, and everyone and their cousin started a YouTube channel, myself included. Lockdowns also impacted visits to hospitals and nursing homes. We saw an increase in elder abuse, and where that was absent, an increase in loneliness and the elderly dying alone. Lockdowns then impacted funeral arrangements. We could no longer mourn together. Likewise, weddings were rescheduled. We could no longer celebrate together. Concerts and show tours were canceled. Sporting events were canceled or extremely postponed. Theme parks were closed. Cruise lines closed. Restaurants closed, some permanently, like Sweet Tomatoes. We could no longer gather for entertainment and fun, not even dinner with friends. We could not go to parks just to find a quiet place to sit or to get away from our families. We could not go boating or paddleboarding. We had drones telling people not to sit on park benches and to stay at home. unless they had to walk a dog. What does this have to do with the unraveling of American society? At first, I thought the impact on the free market was the most egregious, because when the free market was disrupted, this led first to clearly benefiting the powerful, like the big box stores, at the expense of the weak, small entrepreneurs and medium-sized businesses. The rich got richer, the struggling businesses went under, and the poor got poorer. This disruption in the free market did limit options and choices and take away opportunities for economic and business growth. But more importantly, I soon realized it took away opportunities for relationship building. Every small business interaction missed was a trust building opportunity lost. Every personal interaction avoided was a lesson in isolation. And yes, every choice taken away about where to shop and spend money hurt the free market and the information that usually informs consumers and producers about the state of our society. There were also significant changes in churches. In 2020, most churches did not believe they would be able to survive until 2022. Yes, churchgoers stopped giving, but the church is the people, and they stopped doing life together. They gave up their faith for safety. They stopped fellowshipping, and the local and state governments made it illegal in many cases to start again. We saw pastors in Canada get arrested. We saw California pastors in New York City synagogues defy orders. But we saw many more congregations simply acquiesce. And once the lockdown orders were lifted, the result was that instead of government forcing us to stay home from our houses of worship, Americans did so voluntarily. So ultimately, the biggest impact the lockdowns had, even after they were lifted, was the fact they took away most established opportunities for human fulfillment and exposed and exploited fear of one another. And then when they did finally let us open our businesses again and go out in public again, it was only with universal masking, in limited numbers, and in heightened fear of our fellow man.